Disinformation is everywhere. How can you know what you know is real? Do you believe in everything you read online? Are your social media feeds filled with lies? We know based on our previous episodes that the answer to all of these questions is mostly yes. So what can we do about it? How can we fight back against the tsunami of online propaganda? In this episode, we propose a number of suggestions. Perhaps the most direct way to stop organized disinformation is to prevent the large-scale accumulation of personal data acquired by social media companies. These companies use our online history and preferences for commercial purposes to try to sell us things. But this data is often sold to third parties and politicians who use it to polarize us. Social media companies have begun efforts to self-police themselves. Facebook and other major brands regularly monitor and delete false content and post educational content like public service announcements on how to vote. However, it is clear that these efforts do not go far enough. These companies also have little incentive to do this, as inflammatory posts create more clicks and generate greater ad revenue. Some have suggested that government play a greater role in regulating the tech companies. For example, governments could require greater transparency and personal control over what happens to our data. One scenario is that if an app sells our posts to an advertiser or a consulting firm, we should be able to know and voluntarily opt out. Regulatory agencies could even be imbued with the power to perform regular audits on such companies. Germany has been instrumental here, fining and making social media companies liable for the propaganda found on their sites. Social media is not all bad. It can be used to promote cooperation and discourse among those with disparate views. For example, groups could be set up where people on opposing sides of the political spectrum meet and learn from one another. Users can also use social media to educate others on disinformation and to perform fact-checking. Social media ought to be used the way it was originally set up, to share life events with friends and family. People must learn to get their news instead from objective news outlets. There are numerous outlets that employ journalists and practice objective reporting. Many have a digital presence and have been evaluated to be politically neutral. These include the BBC, Forbes, Newsweek, Reuters, and the Wall Street Journal. A number of these sites are even free. AllSides.com has ranked news organizations based on their position along the left-right political spectrum and have produced a graphic showing this, which we show here. Their ratings are based on online content from the United States only and do not include traditional TV, print, or radio-based publication. However, these sorts of charts are very useful to get a sense of whether or not your particular news organization skews left or right. There has been an unfortunate trend recently for informal, subjective, and non-professional journalism. Many citizens are turning towards blogs, podcasts, and video channels to report news or their interpretation of it. This has led to an explosion of competing opinions and facts online. In addition to this, many traditional reporting organizations that do investigative journalism are firing their journalists, downsizing, or going out of business. This has been especially true for local news outlets. As a society, we need to recognize and support investigative journalism. Paid journalists can be counted upon to do a better job at background research and fact-checking. Another way to fight back against media disinformation is to use encryption to protect private data. Blockchain technologies are a form of distributed and encrypted peer-to-peer networks that store data in blocks and that are distributed across the network. Data encoded in this way is difficult to access. This is one model for how our private information could be hidden. Social media companies could offer us the option of this or other types of encryption, perhaps as a paid feature. There are a number of apps that employ self-destructing messages and end-to-end encryption. Examples of these include Snapchat, Telegram, and Wicker. However, not all of these apps offer the same level of privacy, and the downside is that they can be used by terrorists and radicalized agents for their own nefarious purposes. Greater fact-checking is also necessary. Examples of organizations that provide this service include factcheck.org, PolitiFact, Snopes, and Washington Post Fact Checker. Some private companies are now even making money by protecting social media users. This idea of incentivizing market-based organizations to profit from truth has great potential. Another area with future promise is the development of better AI and algorithms to do fact-checking and to identify and remove false information. There are a number of ways to check the veracity of information online. WikiFactCheck and Truth Goggles are crowdsourced sites where users can gather evidence and provide corrections. Some, like Truthy and Sourcer, are designed specifically to fact-check social media content. Videolyzer allows users to rate the truthfulness and bias of videos online in real time while watching them. Others, such as flacchecker.org, are a bit more humorous and entertaining in nature. However, there are a number of sites masquerading as fact-checkers that are ideologically biased, such as Media Matters, and one should be on the lookout for these. There are a number of psychological approaches that we can take to fighting disinformation. Schmidt and Betsch in 2019 did several studies and found that misinformation online can be countered using two strategies. The first is content rebuttal, where an expert presents science deniers with accurate scientific facts. There is also technique rebuttal, where one points out the flaws in a person's reasoning. Examples of these kinds of flaws include reliance on conspiracy theories, cherry-picking of evidence, listening to fake experts, setting impossible expectations for science, and the failure to use logic. One technique for correcting falsehoods is to provide an alternative explanation for an effect. This is better than just labeling someone as wrong, because the new explanation replaces the original explanation. It also is helpful to focus on facts and not to reiterate the original false statements, as repetition serves to strengthen memory representations. So when refuting lies, one should not just state that they are untrue, but give an explanation as to why they are incorrect, and then replace the original explanation with an alternative one. Usually, corrections by themselves are not enough to win someone over. One must first establish trust and build a relationship, earning respect and being warm rather than critical. threats and hostility will cause deniers to become alienated or angry, which makes the situation worse. Michael Shermer in 2017 recommends a six-fold strategy for winning over trust. First is to keep emotions out of the exchange. The second is to discuss rather than attack. Third is to listen and articulate the other person's position accurately. Showing respect, of course, is important, as is acknowledging why someone might hold the opinion that they do. And then finally, show how changing facts does not always entail changing one's entire worldview. According to the Center for Media Literacy, we can define media literacy as the capacity to access, analyze, evaluate, create, and participate with messages in a variety of forms. In other words, it means being able to consume and use information intelligently. Most importantly, in the contemporary world, it means being able to determine truth from falsehood so that one can gain an accurate understanding of the world and make important decisions regarding politics and everyday life. This skill is so important that it should be considered as a necessary fundamental skill that everyone should have, just like reading, writing, and mathematics. How can we stop fake news? Well, here are several suggestions. First of all, consider the source. Click away from the story to investigate the site, its mission, and its contact information. Also, check the author. Is this person actually real? Are they credible? Checking the date is important too. Reposting old news stories doesn't mean that they're necessarily relevant to current events. One should also check one's biases to consider if one's own beliefs affect our judgment. Reading beyond the headlines can also give us a little bit more information about the more entire story. What about supporting sources? Click on those links. Determine if the information given actually supports the story. Then there's just the issue of whether or not this information is by itself a joke. It might be outlandish, satire, or designed simply just to elicit an emotional reaction. And finally, if in further question, one can ask the experts, such as a librarian or consulting a fact-checking site. Some other suggestions for how to prevent the spread of fake news include thinking critically. You can afford to trust information coming from legitimate sources, but be skeptical of the rest. It may take a bit of work, but the payoff is enormous. Also, very important not to share. If you believe something is incorrect, just don't share it with others. Sharing fake news articles pushes them higher up in search result pages, causing others to come across them quickly and believing in their content. Report false information. Some sites, such as Facebook, allow you to flag posts that are harmful or inappropriate. If you believe that a news story is false, make sure to report it to the host so they can take it down if necessary. Learning to ignore is also important. If you encounter trolls or bots online, it's best just to ignore them. If you engage with them, they will continue to respond, or even worse, begin to threaten or attack you. And then finally, looking up resources. There are lots of resources online for those who want to teach media literacy or simply want to know more. We suggest the International Society for Technology and Education as one such organization. Social media was originally set up as a way for friends and family to share with one another. Then it gradually evolved to show more and more news from outside our small personal networks. It was at this point that the information was compromised, being taken over by politicians trying to buy your vote, or state actors for evil purposes. The simplest solution is this: don't get your news from social media. There are plenty of objective news sources out there that are free. Use social media for what it was originally intended, as a place to connect with those you care about. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed this video and found it informative. To learn more about the Saving Civilization Project, see our website, saveourcivilization.com, where we summarize our perspective on what a civilization is, what the threats facing it are, and how we can fight back to make for a better world.